All right, welcome back to the Elias Macco Show. Of course, the developing story we are following this morning, Pablo Rodriguez. All signs are, and our colleagues at CTV News can confirm that Pablo Rodriguez has made the decision to resign as Quebec Liberal Party leader. We are expecting an announcement sometime this afternoon. When anything breaks, you'll hear it on CJAD, so stay tuned for that. We'll have more analysis after the 11 o'clock news. Now let's switch gears. At a time when Canadians are flexing their national identity, boycotting U.S. brands, bristling at Trump-era trade politics, embracing the elbows-up attitude, even spelling has become political. Now, advocates for Canadian English are urging Prime Minister Mark Carney to scrap a federal move towards British spelling, arguing Canada doesn't need to borrow from either side of the Atlantic to define who it is. Let's head now to the editor-in-chief of the Canadian English Dictionary, John Chu. He's on the line. John, welcome to the program.
Hi, it's great to be here.
You're part of this letter that was sent to Mark Carney, right, about the use of British spelling. Tell our listeners why this is so important.
Sure. We feel very strongly about this. It has to do with Canada having its own English linguistic identity, the way it has its own French linguistic identity. We have had a standard for Canadian spelling ever since the Canadian Oxford Dictionary was published in 1998. And the very idea that we can put our elbows up by becoming more British in some way it's misguided. What it is to use the Canadian word of the year for this year, which is maple washing. It is maple washing British imported spellings and saying those are Canadian enough for you. That's not true. We've used IZE spellings for the last 20 years consistently, and the federal government has. There's no reason to switch right now to what even the Oxford English Dictionary refers to as special French spellings of words. Like the OED says use IZE spellings even in England. So, why are we at this point bringing these old, quote, special French spellings, unquote, back to Canada? It doesn't make us look Canadian. It makes us look like a British colony.
And I've heard that, the Canadian English, goes far back, further than just 20 or 30 years. Like, there's always been where we take a little bit of U.S. and take a little bit of British, and we've made it our own. Is that fair to say that this is a Canadian English has a history that goes back far longer than that?
Yes, actually, for sure. Although it wasn't until the centennial year, 1967, that we had our first Canadian English dictionaries, we've always had our own way of expressing ourselves. We've had our own words. We've had our own spellings. Now, where the confusion comes in is that in the 70s and 80s, a lot of kids growing up then, like me, were told, oh, well, you're Canadian. You can choose the British spelling or the American spelling. But that's a really dated idea right now. It's no longer true. You don't have to be quote unquote British to be more Canadian. You can just lean into your Canadianness.
Yeah, and our operating systems have that option. Canadian English is a separate option, on your computer or your smartphone.
Don't get me started on that, because what they call Canadian English it's not very well edited. That's why we're working on the new Canadian English Dictionary, because the Canadian Oxford Dictionary that some of that is based on is, as I said, 20 years old, and it's in serious need of a refresh. But in the next few years, you should see a brand new Canadian English Dictionary that has new meanings for words, new spellings.
So listen,
has words like maple washing and so on. Yeah.
It seems to me this is coming from the top, right? This is a Mark Carney decision. It clearly aligns. We saw it in the tweets coming from him at first, and then it became government press releases, and then it became the budget where the British spelling was used. Do you think this is just a top-down decision from the Prime Minister?
We have not had any official confirmation of that, and we haven't heard a response back to our letter to the Prime Minister's office, but all of the rumors indicate that this is coming from the very top, and it would make sense because Mark Carney has had a very distinguished career living and working in England, and so some of that might have rubbed off on him, and he might be trying to bring us back and civilize us to the standards of England. But as I said, ISE spelling is no longer universal in England, and he's the Prime Minister of Canada. He should be more Canadian.
I'm going to ask it anyways, even though I may have hesitation. Is it un-Canadian of the Prime Minister?
Well, I don't want to call them names, and I think it's up to every Canadian to decide what it means to be Canadian. But sort of Canadian that I would like to see setting language policy is one that does so as a collaborative effort with consultation. It's okay if he makes the final decision as far as I'm concerned. But this idea of sneaking in new spellings to see if people catch on to them, and it's not as though all of the budget is spelled this way. About 80% of the budget is spelled this way. So clearly there's some internal pushback there as well, or some historical inertia. I think I'd like to have a conversation with him about where he thinks the language should go. And no, I'm not calling him un-Canadian. We're all Canadians. We're all just very different Canadians. That's what makes our country Canada.
And pulling it away from the Prime Minister for a second, I wonder if it smacks like there's a little bit of elitism to say the British way is the better way. Do you ever feel that sometimes when it comes?
Definitely. That's what linguists call a prestige variety of English. And yes, I think that's something that even in England these days, you'd be very sensitive living and working there to what people perceive as being prestigious or not prestigious. And yeah, we have a long colonial history of that. And I think we've been trying to decolonize our attitudes and language for the past few decades with good effect. And so, that's another reason why bringing things in that remind us of parts of our colonial history is not a great look right now.
John, thanks for coming on. You come back every we have a great story about language. I think you'd be great to talk to. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me today.
John Chu is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian English Dictionary, one of the signatories of this letter about the use of Canadian English to the Prime Minister.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.